Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to AVX Live. I'm Joe Gilderson with Corporate Audio Visual, and this is my co-host, Ryan Finch.
Hello again, everyone.
Ryan, is this 2 weeks in a row?
That I've been here?
Yeah.
I think it is. This might be a new record
nice.
for me.
That's pretty good. Well, welcome back. We're glad to have you.
I'm so unreliable, I guess.
Hey, you're a little shaky. I mean, ever since
No, don't do it.
you joined the cover of 914 Inc., you've been a little unpredictable. That's
Please
all
don't
I'm going to say.
I'm not asking him to do this. He's doing it on his own at this point.
I mean, what's more fun than breaking your chops? That's all I know. Anyways, let's get into it. So over the last 4 months, we've actually had some really great guests. We've had a chance to learn something new every week, and this may or may not be one of those weeks as we have no guests. But the good news is we're going to talk about one of the hottest things in the events industry world, which of course is going to be the focus on the new hybrid. Well, what's the new hybrid? We're going to get to that. So I don't want to ruin any surprises. But, you know, as things are opening up all around the country, we're very excited. New York City is supposed to be officially next week.
Woo.
Where people are feeling a little healthy. They're feeling a little frisky. They're trying to get out there. They're still wearing their masks, but, you know, we can still actually get together some people right now. So I know our entire, industry is based on being in person. So everybody's really getting back to, they're getting excited to get back to work. But that being said, we fully expect that streaming is going to continue for the foreseeable future. There's going to be some part of the audience that is not going to make it for whatever the reason is. And so today's discussion is really to focus on the planning that needs to be in place to have a successful hybrid experience. Mr. Finch, why don't you get us started?
Oh, well, Joe, you missed a very important step.
Oh, did I forget to?
Yes, please, every Wednesday, 1 p.m., Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Check us out. If you like what you see, or if you don't and you just like us personally, that counts too. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all the above. Put that damn magazine down, Joe.
Sorry.
And if you have any questions,
I don't have a lot of props, so I don't have a lot.
We have some visual aids today. I have my clicker. Look, I'm excited. Again, if you have any questions, please drop us a comment in whatever channel you're watching on. We'll bring you into the broadcast, assuming that it's appropriate, and we'll try to do our best to answer it. So
yeah, we do have some questionable members of our audience, so we do have to screen their comments, yes. But. That's okay. What fun would it be if we
Tip
did?
number 1, screen your comment. No. In any case, I guess we can get right into it. What do you
think we can.
Okay,
Let's
here
do
we
it.
go. Here we go. Visual aid.
Wow.
Super exciting.
That just happened.
Okay. As you can read very clearly on the screen here, your virtual attendees are not a captive audience. Now, that may seem somewhat obvious, right, Joe? You don't physically have them in the room with you. And before all of this, we're calling this the new hybrid for a reason. Before all of this, it was more of like a you can watch too, or like a you can participate too. It wasn't necessarily catered to a virtual audience. And so now that we are catering to a virtual audience, there are things that go along with a virtual audience that really just are not the same as an in-person. And again, some of them are quite obvious, but Joe, I mean, how many groups right now do you see planning multifaceted events?
I mean, we're having a conversation with almost every group that is from June on. In the case of doing there's only a handful that have kind of made the decision clear cut. We're doing this.
Right.
One direction or the other. The others, we're having conversations on both sides.
Right.
Can they have some people in person? Could this be a VIP group? Could this be our sponsors, or could we just have something online? Could we take this part of the event and put that online? So everybody's thinking about it.
Absolutely. I mean, and we're having conversations daily, just like you said, where they're picking our brain on what would work well and what might not work well. And one of the recurring themes that we keep hearing is that we got to have something at all times. Right? They're trying to plan everything down for the virtual audience to the second, which I think is a good idea in theory. But the reality is, you're going to lose people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The idea is that you're catering to a crowd that is trying to make this as convenient as possible. I mean, Joe and I just sat in on a webinar a little earlier on, and it's kind of an industry thing. It was relevant for us. And I gotta be honest with you, I had it in the background while I was working. It was something I wanted to listen to. It was something I wanted to absorb, but not necessarily my focus. You're going to get a lot of that. And as we've covered in many of these, you'll cast a wider net, right? But you have to work on the engagement level. And so one of the things that we see working well is letting people commit specifically to a session, or specifically to one part of that multifaceted event, because the commitment level is just lower on a virtual event, Yep. So the virtual audience isn't getting in their car, driving 30 minutes, planning their entire day around it, getting dressed, hopefully not in that order. They're really not making it a point necessarily to get to this particular event. So if you make it easy for them to do it, if you give them a link that they can put in their calendars, that they can jump right in exactly when they want to, they can take that call at 3 afterwards, then we expect you're going to have a much better experience in general. So again, just bear in mind your audience is not captive, and they may need to be doing other things at the same time.
And hit the record button too.
Yeah, hit the record button, because they're going to come back later on if they missed it, like I am inevitably going to do for that webinar.
I got about halfway.
And look, that's sometimes all that you can expect from your virtual audience, but that doesn't mean that there's no value there.
No, absolutely.
Joe.
Oh, are you going to use it?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Oh.
This is
okay.
Production level.
Go for it.
Boom. I know. That's really something.
I'm totally blown away.
Yes. Well, speaking of being blown away, when we get a document that is so well thought out, down to the minute, like we said earlier, down to the second even, that's not always a good thing. Oh, look at you, camera change.
Yeah, well, you're talking.
That went off script. Yeah, well, you got to add something, I guess. Right? Don't let me do all the talking here.
I'm trying to distract you. That's all.
So the run of show. We very often will get very detailed run of show, but that's not necessarily a good thing. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to explain it in very simple terms and clearly conceptualize what happens first, what happens second, what happens third, and so on and so forth. And look, there are areas of spontaneity for sure. Joe, there was a hybrid event recently where we kind of had to go off script. But did we have some sort of an idea going into it, some sort of concept?
We did. We kind of anticipated there was going to be a few spots where things might not be exactly on time. So we just planned to say, okay, if this happens, we're going to do this. And let's fill it in with X. And it worked out just great.
Right. And now how well would that have worked if the rest of the show weren't totally locked in?
Then it would not feel like a really well-produced experience.
Right. So
we've had those shows in the past. Not recently, but in the past.
We certainly have, So again, it doesn't mean that there's no area for flexibility. Flexibility being a topic we're going to get to very shortly. But it does mean that you need to be able to boil your show down into a way that is very clear to understand for potentially a whole group of people who have no idea what your show is about until they look at this piece of paper. And, it might also be like an Excel spreadsheet. Tip. Put it in an Excel spreadsheet. But in any case, this is where a lot of the time, we're making our input. We're explaining how things should go. But if things aren't clear to begin with, we don't even know where to start. How many times, Joe, like we look in our Dropbox and we see, pieces of content that'll say marketing video V5.6 February 14th, final 2.mp4. And there's like 5 of them.
And the real hard part is when I'm looking through that run of show, if I don't see marketing video 55212, I don't know what the hell that is or where it goes.
Right. And who is that clear to? Like, who knows what video that is? The person who uploaded it is who knows what that video is. Or maybe the person who's managing all the content. But if that doesn't make its way to the run of show, then that's not effective communication. And there's no way for us to sort through it. And so that ends up being a really important and often overlooked part of the job is getting that run of show really pinned down, really clear, knowing every asset is accounted for, the file names are accounted for. We can just plug things in, and then we have that, flexibility at that point because everything else is already ready to go, right? So there you go.
We do have, of course, an interesting comment.
Let's see. A huge problem is boring presenters and speakers during some of these events when it is live.
I'm really hoping that he's not referring to us right this second. I mean, we just started.
Wow. I would be personally insulted.
It would be kind of reflected towards you, to be honest.
Probably. Oh, well. Telling your clients how to keep things interesting and even vetting the people speaking to have some life and not just monotone droning. Well, look, I mean, coaching, like there is a level of coaching that I think is really important in this setting. Like speakers are not all created equal in the virtual environment. Like Joe, I mean, there were a couple of instances early on where somebody who was really good in person was really not good virtually.
Absolutely. They were uncomfortable just looking at this little square, or rectangle that's the camera. I mean, they were feeding off of the live audience, which every musician knows.
Right.
Every theatrical performer and certainly every comedian knows.
Yes.
And some of those people have had a very difficult time during this. Can I just make a quick shout out?
Absolutely.
Candace Maggs, how you doing?
Hey. I thought you were going to do, hey.
You're in the broadcast.
You really blew it on that.
No, you've misunderstood. Stop using a monotone voice and let's get into the program here. I'm ready to click off myself. I mean, come on.
Oh gosh. Well,
Sorry,
you know what? Speaking of clicking, hopefully, Mike, we answered your question on that. I mean, again, there's a level of coaching that, like, that's a task all in and of itself, and it's certainly something that we could come up with resources for. Presentation. A lot of that is in broadcast, where you get people who actually are professional coaches for live on-air talent. And I don't think that has made its way all the way from, say, broadcast production to live event. Virtual event, and to some extent hybrid. But it at the highest level, it probably will soon if it has not already.
Well, I got to say, we do have some friends that actually work just in that field, and they come from theatrical backgrounds, and now they made their pivot to help people online, especially the corporate presenters, to get their skills up to speed, because it is much more like a broadcast experience.
Absolutely. And just like you said, it is a skill as well. All right. So I'm going to go back to my handy dandy. Boo. There we go.
Very impressive. Very impressive. I see why you made the cover now.
I know. That's three now.
That's three.
Who's counting? Anyway, Joe, why don't you tell me what flexibility is a two-way street?
Dude, I have no idea. You wrote the slide. See? I have no idea what you're trying to say here.
That's right. You keep going. I'm going to put you on the spot and make it awkward.
I don't care. It's all right. I'm good with it.
All right. Well, since I'm the one who wrote the slide, I guess I'll explain. What does flexibility as a two-way street mean? Well, kind of what it sounds like. It means that everybody needs to be a little flexible when it comes to planning a hybrid event. There are so many. All right, that's 4. Okay, we're done. There are so many unfamiliar and we'll call it unpredictable challenges that come up in the hybrid setting. That it really takes a little flexibility from everyone. And we're talking venue, we're talking planning, we're talking technology, and we're also talking presenters, and I'll get into that in a second. But we'll start with, for the planners, right? Your event flow. Very often, speaking to my previous point, you come up with your run of show, which is totally critical, and what inevitably works in theory doesn't necessarily translate to practice, right? Like it sounded good on paper, and then when we started testing some things through and running through some pieces, it just didn't feel right. right? So we need to be able to say, okay, well, you know what? Maybe this shouldn't go here and it should actually come here. Or maybe we'll change the scripting to say X, Y, and Z instead of what it did already. So there's definitely a layer of flexibility, that has to work in there. And then on the flip side, right, your presenters. Unfortunately, there's just a lot less flexibility when it comes to the virtual side than there is for, say, in person. I mean, Joe, I don't know if you have any feelings on this, but can you think of what maybe the biggest pain point or biggest area of preference for a presenter in strictly an in-person event would be? Anything off the top of your head?
I mean, in person, there's usually certain things they're looking for, right. At the podium. Whether it is your very fancy clicker, it could be a bottle of water, it could be something very simple. It doesn't have to be the blue M&Ms.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Usually there's a certain couple of things that make them comfortable. It's like being able to see the slides on some sort of confidence monitor,
right,
so that they know where they are in their presentation. It's the same thing.
Or to be
there are certain things that make them comfortable, but being able to see what they're presenting, first one.
Right. Well, and I think of it as their type of microphone, right? Some people are just really animated and they talk with their hands, and if they got to hold something in their hand, they're going to hold it all the way over here off screen where you can't see it.
They could be doing one of these. Are they doing one of these?
Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me? No, not very
on?
well.
No.
So, but the idea being that these are things by themselves. That was nice pantomime, Joe, by the way. I like that.
Thank you.
These are things by themselves.
Pandemic skills.
Pantomiming. Yeah. Talk with your hands. They're things by themselves that are we'll say much easier for, say, us to address on the technology side, or the planner to plan a bottle of water ahead of time. We drop a confidence monitor. Like, those are things that are easy to make people feel comfortable. But when we talk about the virtual setting, if you have a virtual presenter coming into your hybrid event, unfortunately, there's just less flexibility over it. There may be already a train rolling and they need to either get on board or they're not going to have a good time. On the flip side, maybe the presenter is the show, in which case we talk to them ahead of time and see what makes them comfortable, right? But most often, there's a series of presenters, and we need you to fit in this workflow. We can't reinvent the whole script. It's not going to work well because of the way the technology's set up. There's just so many more elements and so many more challenges. And the reality is most of the information, most of the experience for the presenter is coming in. Hold on, wait for it. Is coming in, there we go, in like a window this big. And maybe they got a second device, and then there's a whole thing. Well, I don't really want to use a second device. I just want to use the one device. So, by and large, there's no, one size fits all, first of all, and they need to be prepared to be flexible. So in a long roundabout way, that's kind of the point that we're trying to make. And then, of course, on the AV side, on the production side, technology, we need to be prepared to be flexible. There's an update in the video. We'll do our best with it. Sometimes rendering time takes that off the table. Like, it's just literally not possible. But anything inside of the realm of possibility, we're going to do our best to pull it off without jeopardizing the integrity of your entire show, right? Like, we're never going to say, like, yeah, we can do that, but it might take the whole thing down. That's probably not a good decision on our part. But everything, again, that we can control, that we can do our best to be flexible on, then that's what we're going to do.
I guess now I understand the slide a little better.
There you go. I know you kind of looked at me awkward when I brought it up. You're like, well, all right, that's sure. Good luck.
It's all yours. That's all. Well, do we want to continue down this road here? I mean, do I get a chance to talk now?
Yeah, I'm going to take some water a little bit. I'll be back. You have a clicker, right?
I do. However,
you want to know what it does?
I still want you to advance this slide.
That's because you can't click it with your clicker. Boom.
No, it's not that internet remote clicker that I have used to a very uncomfortable status. But either way, really playing right into what we were just talking about, with the run of show and flexibility, testing and rehearsing. It's not like that would be super cool to do. We really have to do that. And, we just found out through one of our testing calls this week, there was a presenter who was really very uncomfortable with what he was looking at, just like we're discussing with a confidence monitor if someone was in person. He didn't understand really what he was looking at, and it was making him uncomfortable. Now, obviously, he's not going to present well if he's uncomfortable. So we used that flexibility we were just talking about, made a few adjustments to get within the constraints, of course, of the technology. And we got them to a point where they were happy with what they were seeing, and we could then continue. But if we didn't do the test, we wouldn't have known that. It would have been live. He would have showed up that day, and it would have been in the middle of 20 other presenters. We wouldn't have been able to do anything, to be honest. So that testing but the rehearsing, as we're crossing over to the new hybrid, you have some new variables, and just for example, one of the hybrids we recently did, we had a remote person dialing in, and they were a major part of the show. We did not get them until about 30 seconds before we went live.
Perfect.
So we did have a plan B. We weren't feeling real great, but we had a plan B. Now everything went beautifully, and actually they were the star that they were expected to be. But we had tested them previously, days before. We did have conversations. They did have the run a show, but we didn't really get to run through it. And so there becomes some awkward pauses as you're trying to go through. And that's the reality. In person, you have a number of normal pauses. Maybe it's the presenter walking up from their table to get to the stage. Maybe it's the walk from backstage. Either way, there's usually some room that's normal. Somebody takes a drink of water. There's a pause for a second. Those are all very normal things. But you don't see that on TV. You don't really have that gap, or the infamous dead air in radio.
Yeah.
Like everybody's immediately checking their dial. What happened? My radio's not working. Like they're checking to see if something's wrong.
Right.
So we don't really want that.
Yeah.
And that's where rehearsing comes in, because you really have to get the ebbs and flows of each show, especially when you have those remote people then coming into a room. And just a funny little piece. One of the little challenges, of course, with that is latency.
Right.
The latency meaning there's a delay. So if someone is asking a question, of course, they're looking at the big screen. So what do you think of this? Oh, well, it's great. Okay.
Right.
So, you need to coach people through that, because they don't know what to do during that 5 seconds,
And look, I mean, people spend their entire careers training in, say, broadcast, where, I'm so-and-so reporter in the field right now. Let's go back to our hosts. And then they wait, and then it's received on the other end, and they continue. And that pause, that latency, is normal in that setting, but these people have been working on this their whole lives. Like, we're working mostly with people who this is very, very foreign concepts to. And Joe, I'd add one thing to the testing and rehearsal not being just a nice to have. Nobody wants to look bad, and especially not higher ups at your organization or VIPs of many, of all kinds. I mean, honestly, it's usually worse if like the video just failed and just black screen and then it came back on a second later, than having someone look really, really out of sorts, uncomfortable. I mean, like, that's like a train wreck. If it just goes off, it goes off. People refresh and they'll come back a couple seconds later.
Right.
But having someone look bad and that lives on forever, that's actually worse.
Yeah, and that's what we're always trying to avoid. And that's why we bring these points up of having a run a show be crystal clear, being flexible, and testing and rehearsing.
Yeah. We did get a question here, Joe, from Mr. Dardano. How do you balance or advise clients that want to do more vanity or ego-driven content that isn't going to keep the audience engaged? With virtual events, it is so easy to leave. Have you seen clients be more considerate of the audience needs when they are putting together a program? Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think
it is.
I think in general, people have been much more concerned about engagement. We joke around a lot recently about early on, last year, a lot of people were trying to figure out, like, can we do this? And now that they can, they're like, all right, what else you got? You know, what else can we do?
I'm not impressed. What else
can we
you got?
do? Yeah, can we do it better? You know, and a lot of that, especially on the digital side, is is coming down to engagement and those numbers and look, I mean, to some extent, Joe, I don't know if you agree, but like if people aren't watching, it doesn't really matter how ego driven or vanity driven something is. Like if you're not getting the results and you keep doing it, then that's just kind of bad business as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of double fold because part of what we talk about is that the online experience really lives on forever.
Right.
So you could have one of those celebrity people. You could have something that is a little more look at me driven or ego driven, but it could be the connection to the organization.
True.
And that could be a critical component. I mean, look, why did Nike have Michael Jordan represent their shoes? It becomes that kind of thing. If that person has a connection, and maybe it's not the most thrilling piece during an online production, but they can then use that piece, 4, 5, 6, 7 times down the road, it becomes part of their branding. That's a different reason. Yeah. And I think that's the variable that the virtual experience brings to the table.
Right. Oh, there we go.
But that's okay. Excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Dardano. Always insightful questions. Real hard hitting. I appreciate that.
We got to get him back on this show.
Oof, I don't know if the audience is ready. But hey, listen, let's skip ahead to the next one because then I got a couple of visuals too.
I almost misplaced my clicker. That's one of those challenges
that's
I didn't
not
expect.
Good. Yeah.
There you go.
I'm glad you didn't bring it down the elevator into the street in Times Square. But either way, I have had to chase people for it before. So
yeah, there you go.
All right. So planning for in-person setup time and venue challenges. What does that mean? Okay. Well, let's start with the first part, the planning for in-person setup. This is going to take longer to set up than it did before because we're introducing a whole number of elements that we really didn't have before. In a lot of cases, there's other than, specific groups of clients, many of the events we've done in the last year previously did not have a streaming element to them. So they're unfamiliar with that. Once you add that now into a meeting space or an event space or a tent or a parking lot or anything else, you're introducing a whole number of variables that we've actually discussed in bits and pieces during the show. But Ryan, I do have an image. You mind if I actually if I bring something up here? Am I allowed to?
If you can figure it out.
Oh, I can figure it out. I can figure it out.
There you go. I see nothing.
Oh, come on, Ryan.
You so blew it.
Oh, man. All right, fine. Well, then listen. I'm going to work on that at the same time.
Oh, no.
So I guess the first thing is that you have to introduce all the technical time that has to be tested and everything's got to be run through. And now you're adding an internet, you're adding in a whole bunch of different things that just didn't happen before. So that internet has to be tested, right? You now have a whole nother person that's literally doing that. And they have another table full of equipment. So as soon as I can, I'm going to find you that picture that has a much bigger technical area. And of course, to meet today's rules, there's space. Yeah. I'm not on that right now. Both my hands are here. So
this is all me now. Yeah, you got a real problem here.
Not really. It'll all get worked out in seconds. But Ryan, I'm trying to stay on track here because that's what we do for our clients. We keep them on track. Okay.
Hands up.
And the fact is that they have to be spaced out too right now. So you're adding space. You're adding another area. It's like everything is further away. You're adding internet. Everything is a little bit different. If we're bringing on a remote presenter from someplace, we now have to make sure that works, which was a challenge on one of our first new hybrid events. The internet that we had tested previously did not work. Now that was going to be a major problem since, one of the highlights of our show was 3,000 miles away. So that became then the focus. And what got held up instead? Doing some sort of formal rehearsal for in the room. something has to give when you only have a few hours.
Right.
And so that internet had to get worked out, and it did. And like I said, everything was great, but it doesn't make people comfortable.
No.
When you have no internet and a
No.
big part of your show is internet related.
Yeah, you can't expect to pull it off by the skin of your teeth every time too. Like one other curveball and you're not ready in time, right? And one of the funny things, I guess funny is not the right word. One of the scary things is, that IT problem was something that fortunately was able to get tracked down and resolved relatively quickly. But if we're in, say, like a corporate setting, maybe an office building, and that's where your virtual event's taking place, I mean, think about how long it takes to get something done from an IT perspective just because of the level of complexity of those infrastructures. So, like, one small problem could take you a very long time to figure out. And, that's just one of the many things that can go wrong. Joe, you got your picture working.
I know, it's miraculous.
Look at that.
I got to tell you, it was operator error, but
Oh, God, I'm so happy to hear that.
it is what it is.
It is.
But here's
that's
a
big
much
footprint. Mm-hmm.
It is a big footprint. In this particular case, this is like a 70 by 70 area, and we now have to use much more of the space because of regulations. So everything is spaced out.
Right.
And our technical area actually took basically the entire middle of that room. And this was not an overly complicated in-person setup by any means. But the fact that you're doing two different events at the same time. Yes, Mike D'Ardano, that is me actually working. I know. Believe me, I didn't want to, but I was there. We're always there in spirit. But one little thing to point out too, as far as our venues have a lot of challenges right now.
Yeah.
Now, in this particular case, I don't know if you can see it, but with a tent being an outdoor space, what makes it an outdoor space is the ability to have airflow. Now, in this particular case, so then there had to be two openings for air, substantial openings. So one is actually in the left side of the picture. That's like just to the, to the house left side of podium. And then there's another behind our camera operator. There's another 20 feet or so there and another 20 feet on the other side. This particular venue did a nice job with the setup. And they spaced everybody out and they kept everybody feeling safe. And, that's what Dan was talking about last week. He was talking about the audience is going to need to feel safe.
Right.
And they did a good job with it. But that it still doesn't, there's still a lot of space. The other challenges our venues are having right now is they're having a real shortage of personnel. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that shortage of personnel mean? You can turn on the news and you'll hear all about it pretty much every day from here on. All of our restaurants, all of our hotels, all of our catering venues. I'm assuming that amusement parks and everything else is going to fall into the same boat. A lot of people had to leave the industry. They've been unemployed for 14 to 15 months at this point. They had to find something to support their families. Maybe they decided to take another career path or study or move on. There certainly is an element to how unemployment has been handled as well that is affecting our hospitality partners and friends, but they are extremely short on staff.
Right.
And as they're opening up, they have a lot more rules to consider in how they're serving the food, how it's being prepared, how people are spaced out. If you think normally that one wait staff could have probably handled, let's say, 4 tables. Those 4 tables might actually be 50 feet apart at this point. So that is now a different job slightly. And that's something that they're going to be wrestling with in the next 6 months, especially. And that affects the production teams because it also means that there's going to be shorter turnover times and setup times. So I guess my advice to everyone would be to make sure that you actually have setup time in your contracts. The running joke used to be the Waldorf. You had the event space at 5 and the event started at 5. So, there's literally 0 time. And of course there was an event previously, so nobody knew how that was coming down too. But these are things I think just everybody's got to consider.
Right. No,
but Ryan, I'm happy to continue moving on here in our presentation.
Okay. Well, see how seamless that was? I was
blown away.
Yeah. Well, I want to look from our own Jim Marlowe, we are doing a hybrid meeting today.
Oh,
There we go.
wow. Isn't that nice? Good stuff. Good stuff.
Quick.
All right. So how about we go to the next, there we go. Think about what is actually on screen versus on the virtual screen. Okay. So we have in person, one screen. Let's go back to the graphics here. So in person, we have one screen, right? That person down the bottom there was our remote presenter. If you look at the big projection screen in the corner, there she is. It's miraculous. Mike Giordano, just know who had control of that. That's all I'm going to say. All right. But we're trying to come up with ways for them to interact. Now, on the in-room screen right there, we had the person in the room at the podium, and we had that remote presenter on screen. And it worked out really well. But there are things that have to be accounted for in that, because sometimes you don't want what the online audience is seeing on screen, right? Because they really need that camera running all the time. But what if your in-person audience doesn't need that? So you have to think ahead about that. And what that means from a technical side, honestly, most of the time, that's two different people, and that's two separate video areas. And it's, again, plays into needing more time to set up and more time to test, and that clear run of show. Because doesn't that run of show have to be doubled at that point?
Mm-hmm.
That's what our online audience could see right there. And it played out really well. The interacting back and forth was really nice. We just had to factor in, about 5 or 6 seconds there to go from the question to the answer. But all good stuff. All good stuff. Ryan, anything else you want to talk about on the in-person versus remote?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on your point, with the two separate setups, that latency becomes a factor again. And to your point about maybe you don't want what's going out to the audience on screen, there's different ways that we can engineer a system so that it can play in the room as well as in the virtual audience, or for them to be two totally separate shows, so to speak. There's different content on screen than what's going out to your virtual audience, and so yeah, I mean, and adding to the complexity for sure. But there's also different times where that works better than others. Again, not a one size fits all. And sometimes back to flexibility, we'll call back to flexibility. Sometimes you can sacrifice in one area to make up for it in another area. Like maybe, for instance, you don't have the footprint, you can live with the latency. Okay, well, we'll just, whatever going out to the audience is going out in person. There's going to be some latency, and maybe you can live with that. And it's up to our job, as solution providers, to manage your expectations, on that, so that none of that comes as a surprise.
Of course. Or look, it could just be a straight simulcast out to online. It doesn't have to be with all the bells and whistles and graphics and this and that. It could be just point the camera at the stage and let's show everybody online what's going on. Okay.
Right.
That can all be done.
Absolutely.
But it's part of the discussion point with your production team ahead of time.
Absolutely. And I guess we probably have time for one more question here. Back-end logistics on these hybrid events are more extensive than a pure live event. How does that affect the cost of the production?
Mike's going to make us bad people here when we say this. The cost goes up.
Yes.
You're doing two events at once. Now, what does that mean? It depends on the level of production.
Right.
On either side, to be very honest.
Right.
If you're trying to increase the level of the production in the room, but you just want it simple online, okay, that's a manageable expense. But online is more like TV. Do we need to have 3 or 4 cameras? Do we need to make that be a different experience so that it's more interesting to keep them engaged? Then the cost point's a little different. It may be substantially higher than whatever your costs are in the room. It really just depends on what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And I do expect some groups are going to scale down in some regard or another so that they can accommodate both. So maybe we have fewer bells and whistles in the room than we might have otherwise had, but we reallocate some of that budget towards, the virtual side of things. And ultimately a lot of this stuff on the virtual side and the in-person AV, there's so much crossover in terms of both the technology and the staffing and skill sets. that, again, we need to be prepared to be flexible as well. So, it tends to be a sliding scale, and we're expecting it to continue that way.
Well, especially while the audiences are not at full steam in person.
Mm.
I do anticipate that some groups are going to go a little lighter on the in-person because the focus is on the networking or the face-to-face experience.
Right.
And then maybe they put that side of their budget into the online. But again, it really depends. Are you giving them two experiences? I mean, we've discussed this previously. So I think it's just all going to be thought out, but there's a lot of moving parts. And that's why we're doing this series, because I think a lot of people just are unfamiliar with it.
Absolutely.
And it's our job to help them.
It is. And to that end, for those of you watching, for those of you who watch the recording later on, if there's something you want to know about, if there's something that is you're racking your brain on, that you'd like a little bit of input, we can cover that next Wednesday or whenever else we come back, because we do plan on doing this again. The new hybrid is going to be sort of a little mini series within a series. So please drop us a note, send us an email, leave a comment, and again, we'll try and cover that specifically on an upcoming segment. So to that end, come on back. Wednesdays at 1 p.m. every Wednesday, even when we're incredibly busy, like we are right now.
I do have one more thing before we wrap up today's show.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, this one's going to go a little bit off script. So let's just see what magic I can come up with right this second.
Swear to God.
That literally anything can happen right now. But this is good stuff.
If I don't like it, I'm cutting the broadcast.
I got to say, happy birthday to my brother D. He's 49 today. We've been best friends for, 38 years at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, he's an old one. But of course, he's older than me, and that's what's important here.
That's
but
right.
Happy birthday, D. Keep it rolling.
All right. Well, and I guess with that, shall we wrap it up?
I think it's that time, Finch.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you next Wednesday, 1 o'clock. Until then, adios.
Ciao, ciao.